expect this many testing fans. Part of my talk is based around how everyone hates testing, so we'll see. So what am I going to cover today? So firstly, who am I? Part of this talk is about career progression, so I'll be definitely talking about my career so far, places I've worked, hopefully won't upset any previous employers. To be very honest about how testing has helped me progress personally and professionally. And also explain why do I talk about testing. Testing is often an afterthought for a lot of developers. No one really gets excited about testing, apart from me, but we'll see. And why do we test? I can say I love testing and one of my favourite parts of my job, but what value is it bringing to our business? Why is it helping us make more money and also more better software? So back to that company value. And how has it helped me progress in my career? It might not be an obvious link in a lot of people's brains how testing and career progression can be linked. So. And finally, using my favourite testing tool, the React testing library, what's the best way of testing modern React web applications? And really look at that. So a bit about me. Hopefully this doesn't come across as a bit of a self-indulgent experience through my career, but I think it's really helped me in a lot of jobs and a lot of positions, and it helped me ship a lot of software. Having this love of testing, I think really want to try and show everyone how that started and how that's still going really strong today. So my professional role as a full stack TypeScript developer, I think we all learned this morning. Who knows what that means? I spend 99% of my current position writing React code, but it's a server-side rendered application, so who knows what that means. I've got 6 years JavaScript experience. I think the first day on my first job I learned React, and basically I've been going strong since. I'm a UVA graduate. Not a lot. I was going to say a joke then, but not a lot of what I'm talking about I learned at UVA. Read into that as you will. And throughout those 6 years I've worked at 3 companies within Norwich. So one agency / startup, and then one scale-up. Lots of terms, who knows what they mean. And I've worked with some really awesome people, so I think testing and giving people time for testing is a huge deal. And the fact that I've worked with all these awesome people, I've had awesome managers, and they've always given me time to progress with things I really love. Just wanted to shout everyone I had. Maybe some faces on there you recognise. So what is my career like so far? Like I mentioned, started at UEA. I looked into basically starting a computer science degree there. I was a nerd growing up. I didn't know what I wanted to do at later life, so I went into computer science and somehow did the best thing I ever did was learning computer science. And during that UEA, I had an internship at a place called Neon Tribe, and they basically taught me, I was going to say programming, but UEA UEA taught me what programming was, and then Neon Tribe actually showed me this is what it actually means. After UEA, I joined a small startup called Uvisend, and basically a lot of what I'm going to be talking about today and my experience with testing is revolved around this very specific position and how difficulties we had, how testing helped us overcome them, and ultimately got us acquired by a company called Soprano, which was a Australian company that bought us last year, or then I should say now, because I now work at Artlist. And I'll go through each stage of these and how testing has helped each various step. And if you could sum up testing in one meme, it's probably this one. Without testing, I think I wouldn't enjoy my job and the fast demands of the fast-paced companies I've worked at. And I mentioned at the start, why do we talk about testing? Testing is often an afterthought. People don't like testing. I think people that tolerate testing, they tolerate it, they don't love it. And that's why I'm trying to push today is, next time you go and write a test as a developer, maybe come in with a bit of passion, like, come on, I haven't just wrote a feature and now I have to write a test for it. Let's maybe, the test is the best part. I bet no one's ever thought that. But testing has helped me hit demanding deadlines. Each company I've worked at, Artlist and Uvisend have been very demanding in terms of feature output. We need things and we need them quickly. And people often think, I don't have time for testing. But in my experience, testing has actually helped me ship things quicker than I would if I didn't write them. It's improved the quality of my code. So my first job was very much a learning job where I was taught a lot, and the other jobs very much I needed to come with the knowledge. And if you're a self-starter and you're self-learning, testing is an awesome assistant through your learning journey. You're writing tests to prove that what you've just learned, you actually have implemented it correctly. And I mentioned that everyone hates testing. Hopefully not everyone actually really hates testing, but everyone has a negative connotation with testing. No one's loving testing. And if you do love it, like I mentioned, if you don't hate it, you don't love it. No one's writing a love letter to testing every day at work. It's something they have to do. And one thing just to note is, if we don't like testing, we spend a lot of time doing it anyway. So if we're spending 5% of every feature writing a test, and we don't love that part of our job, that is a lot of time to not like what you're doing. So if we can somehow find a way of enjoying that part, all the better. So a quick intro as to what is testing and why we're doing it and why I think it's really beneficial. So basically this type of testing, so there's two types of testing I just want to quickly iterate on. There's the manual side of testing, where a QA team will go through your web application, look at bugs, see what's happening, and then submit those. And then there's a testing which I'll be talking about today, which is developer testing, where we're writing automated checks that perform an action on our code, and then we check the results. And like I said, these are automated, so we can run them and perform these tests whenever we want. So we could do it when building a new feature, for example. During building it, like I said, they're like I was going to say a co-pilot, but that word lost a bit of meaning with some recent tooling. But they're like a back and forth. I can write a test, I can test it, I can change code back and forth like that after building a new feature. So a thing I like to do, which might not be look like a good thing, but if you've built a big feature and you haven't been able to split it up, and you've sat down, you see your lovely feature there, you haven't written a single test, just writing out what you want that feature to do in code, and then testing it, finding actually bugs within it, is a really nice final part of your feature, reviewing what you've done. And the big one is before we release a new feature, so customers don't want broken things. If they work on a website and it doesn't work, you might lose a customer, and that's losing money. So that is the biggest one, in my opinion. And there are several types of testing, and in terms of UI, I really like this, which is from the Next.js documentation. And there's lots of talk within testing about categorizing what tests we're writing. So a big one is unit tests, integration tests, and end-to-end tests. And that categorization is more bad than good, in my opinion. We start to think, oh, this is a unit test, so I need to mock this part of it so it doesn't perform it. I want to write this type of test. Oh, it's an integration test, so I can't actually use a real API. When we actually should be thinking, this is this test, and I'm going to test it because it brings me this much value and this much confidence. We can still categorize them in different ways, and I still think we should be categorizing them, but there are some conversations that I've had with developers where they want to mock an API call, for example, where maybe we should be performing it even though it's a unit test, because we want to actually get the value and the confidence out of there. And within UI specifically, I prefer to categorize it to these two areas. So we have end-to-end, which is probably using a real website. We're actually testing a real website, doing real things. And then we have a component test, which I'll go into in a minute. We're still doing real things with our UI components, but it's very specific to one area, and we're testing a very in-depth flows. So why do we test? And this is why I test. And this is why my bosses want me to test. I think if you're not the one who has to deal with the fallout of a feature breaking, you might not enjoy testing as much. But if you've ever had to wake up in the middle of the night or stay after work because something failed, I was talking to Nick, 50% of his tests were failing on Friday and he wasn't having a good time, this is why we like tests, because they let us sleep at night knowing the code we've written is working and it's still working. And to be honest, I can't imagine what it's like to not write tests for our features and sleep like that. It's not, I'm not going to. We ship less bugs, so the code we write, we know it's working. When we deploy it, we know it's still working. Our customers are happy. And when we ship new features, back to that big word confidence again, we're confident that they're going to get a new feature that works. And we keep existing features working, so as long as we're writing our tests in good maintainable ways, a feature I wrote a year ago, those tests are still passing because the feature's still working. And increased developer confidence. The worst thing as a developer is writing something that you know isn't very good. You know you're building it and it's going to work sometimes and not the other times. The user who's using your feature isn't happy, you're not happy because you know you're not confident in it. So if you can increase your developer's confidence and then singing from the rooftops about the new feature, everyone come and use it, everyone wins. And the big one I mentioned earlier is help us review our own code as we write it. The worst thing is when you review someone else's code and there's a clear error in it that they haven't seen themselves. Writing our tests give us that chance to be a bit retrospective on our code we've written, so we can test it, review it, and it's a nice part of the building process. And then after we write it as well, like I said. And then a big one is communicating behaviors of our features to other developers. So a thing I do a lot is actually looking at some tests of a piece of functionality to actually understand how it works. Documentation is often not prioritized at companies, and testing can be more prioritized. So if I want to see how an endpoint can work, for example, I can go and look at how someone's tested that, and it clearly shows me how it works. But not everyone loves testing as much as me, so why don't we test? We don't like to sleep. That's the only reason I can think of, to be honest. But actually, a real example, they take too long to write. We're spending a lot of time. We just spent a couple of days potentially building a big feature, and now we have to write tests. That's another couple of hours of my day that I need to spend doing something I don't enjoy, and it takes too long. We then have to maintain them. We build more and more features that we now have to maintain, and now you're telling me we have to write more and more tests that we're all maintaining, keeping them working. Sometimes they break, we have to fix them. That is not a fun time for some developers. And we don't have enough time. And this is probably one of the biggest reasons I hear about why developers don't write tests, is because I don't have enough time. I need to ship features, I need features live. My boss doesn't give me enough time. I'm already under it in terms of estimations. And they're not fun to write. I think developers see features as the fun part, and then the test is just some admin you have to do after you've done the fun part. And inconsistency. If a test I've written fails half the time, passes half the time, if it passes all the time, but it doesn't actually make sure the feature works, if I break the feature and my test passes, that level of inconsistency can be very frustrating. And ChatGPT can write it for us. So this is a very interesting example. So I have tested this by copying a React component into ChatGPT and saying, please write a test in React testing line for me. And it did a pretty good job, but looking back on the benefits of testing, making it a co-pilot of back and forth and refactoring, writing maintainable tests, the talk this morning did a great job as to, it's not probably that great. It spat out some code that actually passes and it checks our code, but probably not the best maintainable test that you're going to write. But it's still cool they can do it. And there are other ways of handling bugs. So there's a popular YouTuber I listen to in the React space that basically said his company don't write any tests because they can be alerted about a bug and fix it quicker than actually writing a test. And that's an interesting approach to testing, but I don't want to look like Homer when I'm in bed, to be honest. And the QA team can find bugs. So if you're lucky enough to have the budget for a QA team, I think this is definitely a valid response, but my argument with any form of automation is you always want the human doing the most valuable thing for you. And so if we can stop 99% of the core flow bugs, and our QA team's job is to be the experienced, I know how to make something error in very strange ways that everyone's a winner there. And how has testing helped me career development wise? So Neon Tribe. So we're a web agency, and the best place in my opinion in Norwich to start your career. Like I said, everyone there is so passionate about everything code wise, including testing, and it was a really nice place to start my career. And I think anything testing wise, if someone doesn't like testing, I often say you've had a bad testing teacher, and I didn't have that there. I had a really good testing teachers, and the next time maybe you hire a junior developer and they get brought on, maybe don't, which they actually did there, don't give them a test as their first thing to do maybe, because that inherently, it almost devalues a test. It's saying, oh, this junior that's just joined our team can write these, let's just put him on those. Like, it's very almost demeanorizing of what a test is, and it's just looked down upon in my opinion, and not very good test teachers out there. And this is a JavaScript React talk, but I started out using Laravel. That was a big part of my career, and I think testing in Laravel is awesome, and one of the reasons I love it is because the tooling is so good, and developers often don't like testing because the tooling they're using is shit, to be honest. And if it's not fun to write and fun to use, it's not fun to do. So, and a big part of my career, so I was at Ubisoft for about 4 years, and 2 of those years were basically agency work. So someone would come in, they'd say, okay, we want this website or this chatbot to do this. We would slap AI on the end and then double the price. And that was fun. So for 2 years we were doing that with enterprise customers. So we had a great sales team, making good money, making lots of chatbots. It was very agency based. And then COVID hit. And enterprise customers didn't want to spend money. So it would take about 6 months to go through a lot of these companies' big procurement plans. And that basically dried up completely. So for a small company in Norwich, that was a big challenge. So we had a meeting one day and our CEO said, okay, we can't target the enterprise customers anymore, we have to target mid to small companies and transition over to more of a platform. So monthly recurring revenue, go for small companies that are still willing to spend money, and basically stop trying to sell to enterprise. So basically me and our CTO got on a call and we said, okay, so we have to build a chatbot platform that mirrors things like Drift, ManyChat, Zendesk. We have 1 CTO in meetings all the time, 1 developer me, and then we have 2 junior developers who haven't written a lot of React. And I was sat in my spare bedroom at home while Boris is telling me if I leave my front door I'll get shot, thinking, damn. So we've got a couple of months potentially left in the company, was what it felt like, to be honest, and we needed some ways of making money, so we transitioned over to this SaaS. And a lot of people probably would have thought testing is the thing we should be doing the least there, but testing actually meant we could build things quicker. So we built the entire platform in a couple of months. So I think it was about 3 to 4 months until we got our first customer. And it helps if you're locked in your bedroom to ship a platform this quickly. But speaking about, we shipped a new feature every 2 weeks, and also we hired junior developers and gave them extremely advanced features to build immediately, because we had to. And how can you make sure junior developers have built a very complicated feature well? So this was probably the reason I love Test the most, and to be honest, it was a very difficult 2 years to do this, and I think we shipped this platform and we then actually got acquired because of this platform, and I'm not actually sure how much of this I'm allowed to tell, but I'll just say it anyway. So we got so one of my junior developers down in the back there was the one that built the drag and drop flow builder of our application, and working with him, writing tests for every single part of this flow, that was the core reason why the platform was acquired. So our junior developers being able to write code that was heavily tested, there was some bugs here and there which we would fix with an test, but it meant we basically got acquired by following this testing pattern. And that is basically like my core example of testing. Like, we use testing to move faster, not slow. And then after that, I moved to lovely old Artlist. So Artlist basically provide products for creators, so royalty-free music, royalty-free software, and they actually acquired FX Home about 1.5 years ago now, and that's how they have a UK space here in Norwich. And so I think we're a fast-paced scale-up. We're basically a startup, but we've got 400 people, I think that means. And that means we still have to work quickly, and using my experience of how testing has helped that has really helped me settle in and move quickly. We have millions of active users, and none of them want anything to break, so we need to make sure everything we're writing is tested. And I mentioned FX Home were acquired a year and a half ago, basically doubling the office headcount during 2022. I think when your team is growing massively and you have no tests, you can have a bad time, basically. And there's lots of migration from legacy code bases, so we're creating a lot of new services, a new like decoupled microservice architecture, and being able to test everything as well as everything together in our end-to-end solutions. It's really helping us move quickly. And one thing I just want to touch on is software engineers don't just write features. So features is what we're paid to do. It's the biggest part of our job. But the things in and around there can actually make us stand out from a lot of the rest of developers. I think Artlists, I was involved heavily with the interview process, and no one liked testing, documentation, type safety, static code analysis. So yeah, back to the linting from the previous talk. So just as a comment really is, if you can become passionate about this, find ways to enjoy doing this, you're immediately standing out from most of the people who are interviewing for positions, especially around Norwich. And testing is a big part of how I got a job here at Artlist, so very good to just spend time on some things that aren't just the actual core features. And so the big part of the talk, so when I said at UBSend how we built the platform in a couple of months, we wrote, this is when I learned React Testing Library, and this is where we started testing everything. Every new feature had React Testing Library tests. Before we look at React Testing Library, I think it's important to go back to what we used to test. So this is basically UI testing in 2017. So before React Testing Library came along, we would use something called Enzyme, and that was our testing framework. And it basically followed the convention of, we would use something to set up our components or our UI and our tests, and then we would do something with them and then expect something to happen. And one part of Enzyme was, so we have 3 example tests here, and there's 3 different ways of creating our components, as you can see. So we have a shallow way, we have a mount way, and we have a render way. And I never learned the difference between the 3 and when to use which. Even reading the documentation today, there are scenarios where I have no idea which one to go for in certain scenarios. If we also look at the names of the tests, so we render a class on the top one, for example, we're setting props on a component, we're rendering 3 classes. These are very we're reading this as a developer, we're testing these as a developer. From a user point of view, do I care if there's a class of icon star on the page? Do I care that we can set props manually to a specific value? Do I care that there's 3 things with a certain class? No, because you don't see that when you're testing your UI. That is in your code. So Enzyme was very confusing in terms of setting up of our tests. We're also heavily testing implementation details. If we change the class name of our icon star here, this test immediately fails. Why should it fail? Our user doesn't care if that class is in our page, it cares that it's a different color or it's styled a certain way. They care about what they're actually looking at, not the code. And unreliable queries. So if we look at the wrapper.find methods, for example, within these examples, they're querying basically items on the page using classes and using IDs, and once again, if those change, that's going to break our tests. And the big one, as I mentioned before, testing as a developer. As a UI developer or front-end developer, we're not building stuff for developers. We're writing code for a UI, for a user to use. So why not approach that with that approach as well? And each of these issues are still, and then I just wanted to highlight this because I think everyone's seen a test like this before, where we're basically printing out our entire component, storing it within a file. I've seen some people in this room write this file, write this test, and this can be a good test if you just want to basically make sure everything in your whole suite never changes. So if you want to write some code and it's never going to change forever, use this. But if you're going to write some code that changes, that will need adding to, don't use this. Very fragile, renders without crashing. What does that actually mean? Maybe it renders and it still doesn't work, but it doesn't crash. So very not useful test in my opinion. And this is when React Testing Library comes in. So this is just basically some of the NPM download counts over the past 5 years, and you can see that React Testing Library is basically the more and more popular as Enzyme gets less and less popular. And this also includes some end-to-end test solutions. So for example, Cypress and Playwright and Puppeteer is still outdoing those. So it must be good, yeah? So what is React Testing Library? So back to those two types I mentioned earlier, we had end-to-end and component. So this is a component testing tool. So we're testing individual components to make sure they work. It's the most popular UI tool available within the JavaScript UI ecospace. It's a very simple setup, no more shallow mounting, rendering, which one do I use, which one do I know. We just render our component and then we test it. And the biggest one, which has had the biggest effect on the whole community, is testing as a user. We're making sure all of our tests are actually user-driven rather than developer-driven. And for all types of users. So if a user has a disability, if they need some sort of accessible technology, we can write tests once that test for everyone. So we're inclusively testing. So they're accessible by nature. And this is basically the React Testing Library slogan. So the more your tests resemble the way your software is used, the more confidence they can give you. And confidence is always the biggest one. I remember my first day at Neon Tribe, I saw Rupert, if anyone knows Rupert. He was basically sat there with like his professor grin, stroking his beard, and I asked him, what are you doing? And he said, I'm thinking about how we can make our tests have more confidence in our tests. And he was just sat there like a professor, just thinking, and I always wondered, like, why is he doing that? And this is why I realised, because confidence isn't something you can measure. We can measure, we have this amount of test coverage in our application, but what does that actually mean? We want to test that confidence. If I'm 100% confident in our tests, I'm 100% confident that this feature works. And our job as developers is to make sure our tests get as close as possible to 100%. And I don't think we'll ever perfectly get to 100% where I am certain that this feature will work in production, but we want to get as close to it as possible. And so if we approach our tests from a user perspective, that is the best way of doing it. So what does an actual test look like in React Testing Library? So the first step, we just render our component. Everything that component renders, whether it might have 100 child components that it's also rendering, we don't care. We're testing this component, render it. Step two is we interact with our component, so we might type in it and we might click something. And the big part of React Testing Library is basically its accesses or its queries. So the get by role here or the get by role down the bottom, we're using the role of the actual thing within our page, so the text box of the button, and then we're using the name of it to actually take it. So that name is what you see on the screen, but it's also what would be read out if, for example, a screen reader hovered over it. For someone with partial sight, it would read the text box of name and it would read submit button. So we're testing for every type of user there. And then once we do our action, we expect something to happen. So rather than checking that there's an actual class in the page, we're testing, okay, I can now see that an alert's popped up. and it says my user has been successfully created. So this test will always pass unless something breaks it, or unless you can't no longer submit this form, for example. So this solves a lot of the issues people have with tests where it's you need to keep updating them to keep them running. This will always work as long as this feature always works. And I want to touch quickly on accessibility. I know there's a track tomorrow dedicated to it, and they'll do a much better job of explaining to me, but React Testing Library helps us make sure our applications are accessible, and accessibility is something that isn't prioritized enough in the web space. A lot of apps aren't accessible, and that's because developers are lazy. Developers might not understand how to make things accessible, and also there's no way of making and keeping it accessible. With the React Testing Library, our testers are checking, if we write them correctly, that the things we're building are accessible by nature. So how do they do that? So accessibility in general is, we want to build our applications for everyone. So for example, at Artlist, a lot of our content is around music. We still try and build our music for deaf people, for example, which might seem crazy, but we want lyrics for songs. We want people to be able to read our songs, so that is still a big deal for us. And accessibility includes lots of different areas, such as impaired vision, motor difficulties, cognitive impairments, deafness, and another reason if a CEO or someone isn't giving you time and doesn't take this seriously is there are legal requirements with accessibility in certain industries in the UK, and it's a lot more strict in other countries. So if you don't make something accessible, there are potential legal ramifications and also fines if you don't do that. And how do we solve it? Like I said, tomorrow, go to the talk, they'll do a much better job, but from my point of view, the simplest things are following web standards. So on the previous screen, we've used a text box and a button because they're the right tools for the job. That means screen readers and the browser will do that and use that in a specific way than if we just had a div that we added an on-click, for example. A screen reader wouldn't use that to the same value as if we used the correct stuff. So following standards and also labeling our content correctly. If we do both of those things, a lot of accessibility features can be solved very quickly. And how does React Testing Library solve this? So like I mentioned, it enforces the correct semantics and it enforces the correct labeling. So using the correct role for what we're trying to do, so using a button for something that needs to be a button, using a text box for something you need to enter details into. And just as a quick example as to how it can help us, so here, for example, we have an input and we've hidden it from the screen. If we were just testing this, saying get me the ID of name and type into it, that would probably pass our test. But because we're saying type into this input, that's called name and is a text box, React Testing Library will now tell us I can't find an accessible element with that role. So it's immediately found an issue that we wouldn't have had with the previous version of testing. And there are also ways you can configure React Testing Library to basically help you. So, for example, getting the one here that's specific to screen readers. So it's basically helping us. And I learned a lot of accessibility through React Testing Library, through warnings like this, where I would do something and it would tell me, hang on, you've done that slightly incorrectly. And that it's a great back and forth learning tool just for that. And if you set it up in a specific way, you can also enforce it to make you use the correct type of selectors. So here we've used get by role. There are other ones, but this is the best one because it tests the role of the element and also the name. And there are ways you can make it be much stricter by doing that. So let's try a demo. I think this projector hopefully will let you see the code. Can everyone see that okay?
Zoom in one more, I think.
Yeah. Oh my god. It's like my grandma's computer. So I've just created a simple Next.js React app. And it's basically a form. So to create a user form, I put my first name in, and I put my company in. save, it hits an API, and then it pops up a little notification saying successfully create that user. So let's write a test that using this huge this huge font. So the first thing I'm going to do is let's create a test file. Let's say, as a user, I can fill out the form with the correct details. So user-centric testing. And then let's render our component. And it's just a React component. And then let's import that from React Testing Library. So we've immediately got our form. And then let's, everything we interact with in terms of React Testing Library is the screen. So you can envision the screen as basically our DOM or our web page. And everything we perform within our tests is done by the screen. So if I call this debug method on our screen for now, and then if I run our test suite, it's now basically outputted our entire page. So this is our page within the context of our test, and this is what we have to work with. So if I want to basically fill out my form and submit it, we can use the user event package, I believe. The live demo. Can't remember the name of the package. There we go. So this package is basically comes populated with all of the actions we can do onto our inputs. So we find this our user event, basic function. To type within this, and then we want to select what we want to type. So I want to get by role, and I want to retrieve the text box, and the text box is called first name, and within that text box I want to type my name. So this is very obvious what's going on here. We're just typing into a text box with a value, just as a user would if they were using our application. And let's do the same with our last name, and then for our company. So we've done our setup, we've done our action, so what we want to actually do within our test, and now our actual outcome. So what do we actually want to test here? So we want to expect that the screen as a role, so there's something on our page with an alert dialog that says, I think, Matty Williams, well that's what did it say, I can't remember. Successfully created Matty Williams. Who works at Artlist. And we expect that be in the document, so within our page. And I think, yep, so this shouldn't work. And the reason that isn't working is because there is a delay in when we actually show that. So you can see there is an asynchronous operation happening here where we hit save, it's hitting an API, and then after a couple of seconds it then pops up. And one awesome thing about React Testing Library is that it has this built in for us. So we can wait for this thing to happen. And now, when we've imported it correctly,
You are not submitting your form.
good spot.
Could be a pair programming there, wouldn't it?
I'm going to pretend like you've never used this library before so I can say how intuitive it is. So we want to click the submit button. And it's called save, so here we go. So we can debug our code here and see why it's not. So I think the issue is it's because this thing is basically not an alert by the looks of it. So we found that the thing that the screen reader is going to read out actually is the wrong role. And I won't go into the actual code here. This is bad. So let's get our test passing. So we can use another. So we just get it by the text. There we go. But that is, you can already see how cool this is now. Now it's told me when a screen reader reads this out for a user, it's not going to know that it's an alert. So now I'll go back to my code and I'll refactor it to actually see if it'll be the right thing. And now a screen reader will say, heck, this is an alert, you need to know about it right now, and interrupt whatever they're doing. And then I'll quickly just test the bad path. So maybe let's test. So this is a required form, so you have to give each item, and you can't save it because we disable that button. So let's say as a user, I cannot submit the form until I have filled out each field. Do you know how long we've got left on time?
We're done.
We're done?
Mm.
Oh no.
You alright?
We're not going to be able to write this test.
You've got 30 seconds.
No pressure. I just want to quickly mention, because a big part of React testing library is the effects on the community. It's a component testing tool at the end of the day, so what if we want to write end-to-end tests, for example? And the effect it's had is that it's brought user-centric queries and user-centric testing to the forefront again. So all of these frameworks and all these libraries use the same way of interacting with our UI. And I just want to shout out Playwright.js as well, which is becoming a big player in the end-to-end game. So the Cypress.js is probably the biggest one at the moment, but Playwright is becoming a big competitor, and they are basically a Microsoft-created end-to-end package. And you can see how we're interacting with our components and our UI is basically identical to what React Testing Library has brought into the fold. So using roles to identify what we're clicking, basically using labels to see that the thing we're doing is named correctly. And that's why React Testing Libraries has been so good, because it's pushed that into even packages that aren't itself. So to summarize, testing is awesome. It keeps our features working. It's helped me build things quicker than if I didn't write tests. And there's not a lot of competition in this space, I won't lie. If you're going for a job and you say, I'm a big testing fan, obviously don't lie, but that will get a lot of praise. And then React Testing Library is the best way of doing it, in my opinion, with React. So it's the most popular tool. Its approach that it's used is being basically used by all testing libraries around the ecosystem as well, not just it. And it keeps our features working for all users, whether it's an enabled user, whether it's someone using a mouse and keyboard, a screen reader, it keeps it for everyone. Thank you.